James Whitmore checked his watch for the third time, his jaw tightening. His blind date was now 15 minutes late. His 5-year-old daughter, Sophie, sat across from him at the elegantly set table, coloring in the activity book the restaurant had thoughtfully provided. This was a mistake. The whole thing was a mistake. He shouldn't have let his sister talk him into this blind date. He definitely shouldn't have agreed to bring Sophie along, even though his sister had insisted that any woman worth dating should be comfortable meeting his daughter early on. And he absolutely shouldn't be sitting in one of the city's nicest restaurants, feeling like a fool as the minutes ticked by. "Daddy, can we order now?" Sophie asked, looking up from her coloring. "I'm hungry." "Soon, sweetheart." "We're waiting for someone. The lady?" "Yes, the lady. Though I'm starting to think she's not coming." At 36, James had been a widower for 3 years. His wife, Sarah, had died in a car accident when Sophie was 2, and James had thrown himself into being both father and mother while running his tech company. Dating had been the furthest thing from his mind until his sister had staged what she called an intervention, insisting he needed to start living again. "Sophie needs a mother figure," his sister had argued. "And you need a life outside of work and parenting." So here he was, waiting for a woman named Emma, who his sister claimed was perfect for him, despite being 20 minutes late. James signaled for the waiter. "I think we're going to go ahead and order—" "James?" A woman's voice interrupted him. "I'm so sorry I'm late. Traffic was terrible, and then I couldn't find parking, and I should have left earlier, but I was nervous and kept changing my outfit. And I'm rambling, which I do when I'm nervous, so I'm just going to stop talking now." James looked up to see a woman in her early 30s with blonde hair and a blue dress, slightly out of breath and clearly flustered. She wore a cardigan over her dress and held a small clutch purse like a shield. "Emma?" "Yes, hi. Again, I'm so sorry for being late. You must think I'm completely disorganized and rude." James stood, his irritation fading slightly at her obvious mortification. "It's fine. Traffic in this city is unpredictable. Thank you for being understanding. I promise I'm not usually late." "Well, sometimes I'm late, but not usually this late, and—" She caught herself. "I'm doing the rambling thing again." Sophie had been watching this exchange with interest. "You talk a lot," she observed with the blunt honesty of a 5-year-old. Emma looked down at Sophie and smiled. "I do, especially when I'm nervous." "Are you Sophie?" "Uh-huh, I'm 5. This is my coloring book. Do you want to see?" "I'd love to." Emma sat down and genuinely examined Sophie's coloring, asking about her color choices and commenting on her technique. James found himself relaxing slightly as he watched them interact. The waiter took their orders and conversation began, though it was stilted at first. James asked the standard first-date questions, and Emma answered, but he could feel himself remaining guarded, looking for reasons this wouldn't work. Emma was a teacher. Elementary school, 3rd grade, she lived alone in a small apartment. She liked reading, cooking, and hiking. She'd never been married and didn't have children of her own, all perfectly pleasant. All perfectly boring. Nothing wrong with her, but also nothing that made James think this was worth pursuing. He was already composing his polite exit speech in his head when Sophie spilled her water. The glass tipped over, sending water cascading across the white tablecloth toward Emma's side of the table. James reached for napkins, mentally cursing, but Emma was faster. She grabbed the glass, mopped up the water with her napkin, and said to Sophie with no hint of annoyance, "Oops. Good thing it was just water and not my cranberry juice. That would have been much messier." "I'm sorry," Sophie said, her eyes welling with tears. She was in a phase where mistakes felt catastrophic to her. "Hey, no worries," Emma said, crouching down beside Sophie's chair. "I spill things all the time. Last week I knocked over a whole cup of coffee right onto my laptop. My laptop lived, but it was scary for a minute. Water on a table? That's nothing." Sophie sniffled but smiled. "Did your computer break?" "No, thankfully. I had to dry it out with a hairdryer, but it survived. I was very careful. Much more careful than I was with the coffee." As Emma helped clean up the spill, chatting easily with Sophie, James found himself reassessing. The warmth she showed his daughter, the genuine kindness, the way she'd immediately put Sophie at ease. That mattered more than any resume of accomplishments. Their food arrived, and the conversation became easier. Emma told stories about her students, funny, sweet stories that showed she genuinely loved teaching. She asked James about his company, but also about Sophie, about what she liked to do, about her favorite books and games. "I love The Princess in Black," Sophie announced. "Daddy reads it to me every night." "Oh, I love that series," Emma said. "Princess Magnolia fighting monsters while everyone thinks she's having a tea party. What's not to love?" Sophie beamed at finding someone who knew her favorite books. They spent 5 minutes discussing the various monsters and whether the hero's disguise was actually any good. James realized he was smiling. Really smiling, not the polite social smile he'd been wearing earlier. After dinner, as they were walking out of the restaurant, Sophie suddenly said, "Daddy, I need to use the bathroom." "Of course, sweetheart. Let's find it." "I can take her if you'd like," Emma offered. "If you're comfortable with that. Sometimes it's easier for ladies' room things." James hesitated, then nodded. It was a test of sorts, and he knew it. "Sophie, is that okay with you?" Sophie took Emma's hand without hesitation. "Okay. Come on, Miss Emma." They disappeared toward the restrooms, and James waited in the elegant hallway, checking his phone and thinking about the evening. It hadn't been what he expected. Emma wasn't the polished, perfect woman his sister had described. She was nervous, talkative, a little clumsy, but she was also genuine, kind, and wonderful with Sophie. When they returned, Sophie was chattering happily about the fancy soap dispensers in the bathroom. Emma caught James's eye and smiled, and he found himself wanting to see that smile again. Outside the restaurant, James prepared to say goodbye, to thank Emma for a pleasant evening and leave it at that. He'd been planning to end things politely from the moment she'd arrived late. But Sophie had other ideas. "Are we going to see Miss Emma again?" Sophie asked, looking between them. "Well, that's something your dad and I would need to talk about," Emma said tactfully. James looked at Emma, then at his daughter's hopeful face, and made a decision he hadn't planned on making. "Would you like to have dinner again? Maybe something more casual next time. Perhaps we could take Sophie to that pizza place she likes." Emma's face lit up. "I'd really like that." "But Daddy was going to say no," Sophie said with the perceptiveness children sometimes show. "I could tell." "You had your leaving face." James felt his cheeks warm. "My leaving face?" "You know, the one you make when we're at boring grown-up things and you're ready to go." Emma laughed, and James found himself laughing too. "Apparently I'm very transparent. To 5-year-olds, maybe," Emma said kindly. "For what it's worth, I thought you were going to politely end things too. I could feel myself being evaluated and found wanting." "That's not—" James started, then stopped. "Okay, maybe a little. I'm sorry. I was being unfair. You were being protective of your daughter. I understand that. But for the record, I had a really nice time tonight. Sophie is wonderful, and you're not as scary as I feared." "I'm scary? Your sister warned me you might be guarded and skeptical about dating." "She wasn't wrong," Sophie tugged on Emma's hand. "But you're nice. That's what matters. Right, Daddy?" James looked at his daughter, at her earnest expression and the way she'd already bonded with Emma in one evening. He looked at Emma, at the kindness in her eyes and the patience she'd shown with both of them. "Right," he said. "That's what matters." They exchanged phone numbers and made plans for the following week. As James and Sophie walked to their car, Sophie skipped along beside him. "I like Miss Emma," she announced. "I'm glad. Are you going to marry her?" James nearly choked. "Sophie, we just met her tonight. But you liked her." "I could tell." "You stopped making the leaving face. It doesn't work like that, sweetheart. We have to get to know each other better first." "Okay, but I think you should marry her. She's nice, and she knows about Princess Magnolia, and she didn't get mad when I spilled the water." James smiled, buckling Sophie into her car seat. "Those are pretty good qualifications." "The best ones," Sophie said confidently. Over the next few months, James discovered that Sophie might have been onto something. He and Emma started dating, carefully and slowly, always with Sophie's needs at the forefront. Emma never pushed, never tried to rush into a parental role, but she was present and consistent. She came to Sophie's kindergarten play and cheered louder than anyone. She learned how to braid hair after Sophie asked if she could do the fancy braids some of the other girls wore. She showed up when Sophie was sick with the flu, bringing soup and children's books and offering to help so James could rest. Most importantly, she made Sophie laugh. The apartment that had been quiet and somewhat sad became filled with Emma's stories about her students, her dramatic readings of picture books, her willingness to play elaborate pretend games about princesses fighting monsters. James fell in love slowly, carefully, aware that this wasn't just about him and Emma, but about building a family. He watched how Emma interacted with Sophie, how patient she was, how she never tried to replace Sarah's memory, but instead made her own place in their lives. 8 months after their first date, James asked Emma to marry him. Not in a restaurant or some grand public gesture, but in their living room after putting Sophie to bed, because that's what their life would be. Quiet moments, shared responsibilities, building something together. "I love you," he told Emma. "And Sophie loves you. And I want us to be a family officially," Emma cried, which made James panic until she said yes through her tears. Sophie, who had been supposed to be asleep but was actually listening from her bedroom door, came running out. "You're going to marry Miss Emma. I told you that you should." James laughed, scooping up his daughter. "Yes, you did. You were right, I know. I'm always right about people being nice." They married 6 months later in a small ceremony. Sophie was the flower girl and took her responsibility very seriously, instructing everyone on where to stand and when to walk. During the reception, James's sister pulled him aside. "I told you she was perfect for you." "You did, though I almost didn't give her a chance." "Thank goodness Sophie has better judgment than you do." James smiled, watching Emma dance with Sophie, both of them laughing. Thank goodness. Years later, when Emma was helping Sophie with homework and James was making dinner, their normal evening routine, Sophie would sometimes ask about the night they all met. "Tell me about the fancy restaurant," she'd say, and James and Emma would tell her about the spilled water, the bathroom trip, and most importantly, about a 5-year-old girl who saw something her father almost missed. That sometimes the right person is the one who's just nice. The one who shows up even when they're nervous and late. The one who treats a child with kindness and patience. The one who makes a family feel complete without trying to replace anyone who came before. "You were my best wing woman," Emma would tell Sophie, using a term she'd learned later. "What's a wing woman?" Sophie would ask, even though she'd heard the story before. "Someone who helps you find the right person." And you definitely did that, because I could tell Daddy was going to say no. I could see his leaving face. "Your leaving face," Emma would tease James. "The most transparent face in history." "It worked out," James would say, pulling them both close. "We all got exactly what we needed, even if I almost walked away from it." "But you didn't," Sophie would say confidently. "Because I said you shouldn't. Because Miss Emma is nice, and she was. The nicest, most patient, most loving person James had ever met. All because his 5-year-old daughter had seen what he'd been too guarded to notice. That sometimes nice is exactly enough. If this story resonated with you, please like, share, and subscribe for more stories about second chances, listening to the wisdom of children, and building families with patience and genuine kindness. Comment below about a time when someone else saw potential you almost missed, or when you gave someone a second chance you're grateful for.